Okay, so I believe we're recording here. Yeah, should be. Okay, so we're here at the Star Wars API, and essentially what this is somebody has done the work of going through all these movies and laying out who a number of different things. So we've got some different possible things that we can explore. We can explore people, we can explore planets or starships. Um, and the reason why this is great is because this person has opened up a whole bunch of information for us that we don't have to store on our own server or in any other place, really. What we can do is we can make individual calls to this particular API and retrieve information on the fly as we need it. So what we're going to try to do today is just build a very simple thing where we've got on a page a button that we can click on, and it's going to bring us back a random character from Star Wars. All right. So I'm going to open up VS Code, and we'll just create a new file. Let's see here. Save that on the desktop. We'll just call it index.html, and very quickly throw in some boilerplate there. Is that marker in the way? It's not a problem for you guys?
In the way of the line numbers.
All right, do you want me to erase it or
No,
no?
you don't need to.
No, no big deal. Okay, cool. All right, so we just got like a really basic HTML document here, and what's that? I guess I'd have to change the theme. Is the light theme bugging you? What's that? Not a big deal. What if what if what if I blow it up a little bit? Does that help? Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do, you guys probably remember in some of your assignments how you'd use jQuery for pretty much almost everything, right? Um, Keep in mind that we don't have to use jQuery to make API calls, but in this particular instance, we will. So inside my body, let's just create a quick heading. We'll say Star Wars. Save that, and then we'll go into the browser here, open up a new tab, open the file, desktop. All right, so we got something on the screen. Star Wars. The next thing we're going to do is we actually have to load in jQuery in order to be able to use it. So I'll just check jQuery library. There should be a link, I think hosted something or others here. Hosted libraries on Google. So I'll just, whoa, that's D3. So over here we got jQuery. Grab the 3.x snippet.
I tried using jQuery like on a CDN. I think if it's like minified, it doesn't come with Ajax. So just be careful when you use.
Is this the minified one? Oh, this is .min. So that's the one that you used that did not include. Oh. Okay, so let me see if I can get the, where's the non-minified?
Maybe just get rid of the min,
And it'll be good. All right. Let's do that then. So then, in order to test this, we're going to add a script tag, and then inside here, we'll just do our document dot ready function. Oops. And then we'll just console log something out, make sure that this is actually working, right? So when the document is ready, we're just going to run this function right here. So we'll open up our console. Ooh. All right, refresh the page. We got hello in the console, so good. jQuery is working. We know that's solid. Yeah, claps all around, right? All right, go jQuery. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to make a quick, so when we load the page, let's just pull up the first person in the Star Wars API, and then we'll just simply console log that, right? So the syntax that we want to do here is we want to use this $sign, and that tells the tells us that we're using the $sign basically tells us we want to use the jQuery functions. That's all that's doing. And the function that we're going to use is .get. This is Ajax, as Tanner pointed out, and we're going to pass in the URL that we want to get from. Okay, so the URL that we want to get from is just this guy right here, and then we want people/1. So we'll put that in quotes there. People 1. And then the next thing, so let's quickly check the documentation for jQuery, so that we know what we have to pass in when we run a GET request. So here's .get. Whoops. Actually, we want to be doing an Ajax request, so .ajax. Ajax error. Oh, here we go. Okay, so .ajax is the function that we want to use to actually reach out and make this GET request. All right. So here's an example. We can run .ajax, pass in a URL, and then we can give it a .done function, which would, what does the .done function give us? Oh, yikes. Okay, so we should get some kind of data back, right? So let's try this. So when the document loads, let's call the .ajax function against people at, or the very first person available, and then let's console log the data that comes back. And we get nothing. Ajax. Okay, so I believe there's a success object option for Ajax that we can tap into here. So I'm just going to try it that way. We'll do Ajax, the options we have, there's a URL that we're hitting, and then we'll give it a success function, which does something. Okay, close that out. Oops. All right, let's try that. All right. Did you guys see that we got some data back here? So what does this data that we got back, what does that look like to you as far as a data structure? Yeah, so for the Python folks, that's a dictionary. In JavaScript, this is just an object. That's all it is. So we've got a number of different properties here. We've got the birth year, created, edited. We've got eye color, gender, hair color, a whole bunch of good stuff. So what we're going to do, again, what our goal was, we were going to create a button on the page that we could click, and then we would get a random person from the API and display something about that on the page. So let's just kind of fumble around a little bit and see how many different people there are available. So if I go to people 100, do I have anyone for that? So I got a 404 error, so there aren't that many people in the database. What if I go to people 90? Again, it's a 404. If I go 89, 44, okay, 88. Okay, cool. So 88 looks like the highest person that we have to select from. So that's kind of our, at this point, what we want to do is we want to restrict our search from 1 to 88. Makes sense? All right, guys. How do you think we're gonna get a number from 1 to 88? But we want like a random number, right? Let's see. Random. So let's so first things first, let's just put a button on the page that we can actually interact with. And then we'll put click me on there. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to give that button an ID so that we can call it from jQuery. So let's just call it ID equals my button. And then inside here, when the document is ready, let's attach what's called an event handler to the button that we put there so that when we click on it, we're going to do something, right? So in jQuery, we can use that $sign to call out a specific element. And since this is an ID, I'm just going to call out my button. And then we're going to do a click handler, right? And then we'll just run a little function inside of there. We'll just test this to make sure that this works. So clicked, yes. I'll comment this out real quick. All right. So refresh the page. Oops. Click the button. Cool. You guys see how we're getting the click in the console? All right. So that part's all good. Then the other thing we want to do is probably set aside some part of our document to actually receive whatever that data, because we're going to want to display it once we retrieve some information about a person. So let's just create a div up in here, and we'll say this is ID equals data. Now inside of our click handler, let's figure out how to get that random number. So in JavaScript, we're going to use the math.random. And for you JavaScript aficionados, what does math.random give us? Right, exactly. So we're probably going to want to do what to this number to get something from 1 to 88. Okay.
Plus 1, right? Because it's 0 to 1, so you're going to want it to be 1 through 88.
Okay. So let's just do, so for now, let's just do this. We'll console log math.random. And then we need to actually, we want to turn that into an integer as well, right? So do we want to floor this? And then, times, oops. Actually, we want to multiply it by 88 and then add the 1, right? Yeah, yeah. So math.random is going to give us a 0 to 1.
You want to add first, and when you get the chance to multiply by 0.
So we'd probably want to multiply by 88. By 100? Is it? Well, that's why we're applying the math floor to it, because that's actually gonna, yeah, turn it back into an integer.
For adding one, don't we gotta do the 87?
87 sounds correct. All right, so let's just log this. So we'll click it a bunch of times and see if we're getting what we're expecting. Say that one more time. I don't know. Does that work better?
I don't think we need to do that in JavaScript. When you do it random,
Times 87 would be like 0.57 times 87. That would give you like. It's not good range.
Right, but so let's just examine the ends of what we're gonna get, right? So if we go random and we get 0, 0 times 87 will give us 0, right? And then math floor of that's still gonna give us 0. Then we add 1, so that would give us an index of 1. That's our lowest point, right? How about our highest point? So if math.random gives us a 1 back, and we multiply that by 87, and then we floor that, we get 87, and then we add 1, so that gives us 88. So that's correct, right? So what if it's halfway? What if we get 0.5? So then we're going to go 0.5 times 87, which is what, 43.5, which gets floored, 43 plus the 1, 44. Pretty much what we want, no? Does that sound right? Because as I'm clicking this here, I'm getting some pretty good numbers. 79, 52, 36, 74, 66, 80, 81. Okay. Everyone on board with that? Does that seem pretty solid? Good? Okay. All right, cool. So now that we're getting the random numbers that we want, let's actually do something with those numbers. So let's just, instead of logging that, let's just set it equal to some variable. So var num equals that thing. And then we're going to bring in this Ajax call that we had outside here. I'll uncomment that. Whoops. Hang on a second. And then move that up in here. And instead of passing in a 1, we're actually going to pass in whatever random number we just generated. So I'm going to do string concatenation on this with the number that I just got. So let's save that, and we want to kind of keep checking as we go to make sure this thing's working. So click the button, and you can see that we got back this data from, can anyone pronounce that? Sacy Teen? Am I saying that right? Sacy Teen? All right. Wow, that's a new one. Who's this? Corday. Okay. Interesting, though, it doesn't seem to be passing back the ID that we just called, right? Say that again? Well, because the number that we're providing it is essentially the... It is there? Oh, well, that's true. The URL contains the ID, but it doesn't include the ID as a property in the object, which is kind of interesting. But if you check the network tab, you would be able to see, what the URL that you hit. Or if you check the object that was returned, it does include the URL. So there's that. What is it? So the network tab just shows you all the network requests that are happening when you load a page. So if we, let me just expand this up here. So if I refresh this page, you'll see I've loaded a couple files. I loaded my index.html and jQuery itself. So that would include all assets as well too. So if we're loading in some CSS or some pictures or something like that, you'll see all of those things come in through the network tab. So it's pretty helpful, especially if you're making requests and for whatever reason you don't know what came back with the request. You can actually look in the network tab, and I'll show you how that goes. So if we made a request, wow, it had a 301 request status. So you can see the third one actually returned a 200 status code, which means that it was successful and we got some data back. And you can look at it here in the preview. So this will be kind of come in handy if you're making API calls to your own backend and you want to see something didn't come back right and you don't know why it's going haywire. You can always check the network tab and see what happened there. So everything's going really well. We've got our button click triggering the API call. We're generating our random number every time, and we're getting back the data. So the only thing that's really left to do is we want to put that data on the screen and view it. What attributes would you guys like to show on screen when we pull a person? Name, yeah, that's pretty solid, right?
Your name, Mass.
Mass. Oh yeah, that is on there. Cool. Yeah, all right. Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, like literally Mass.
Yeah, Mass. All right, so what we want to do before we actually do any of the JavaScript coding, we can kind of visualize what we want this thing to look like, right? Inside the div. Oh, sorry guys. We'll just say, so name is something that we want, right? We're going to pass the name in. And then the other thing that we're going to want is mass. But, of course, if I just put this in the HTML, it's not going to change at all when I make these calls. So instead what we're going to do is we are going to update the HTML as we go. So when we make a request, the data comes back. Let's then update that particular div with the new information. So inside of our success function here, let's grab some bits of data. So we have the name and the mass. These are both properties of the data object that we get back. So we can say var name equals data.name, right? Var mass equals data.mass. Now I want to do something with those two things. So what I'm going to do is just create a string concatenation of the HTML that I want to appear in the document. So let's just set a new variable. We'll call this HTML. And the first part of that is just going to be a p tag, and we're going to say name. And then we're going to add in name. In fact, I'm just going to get rid of these because we don't really need. We're only going to reference it one time. So there's no sense in making it a variable. So let's just go data.name. And then we also want to add on an end p tag on that one. And then I can add to that the second line, which is just going to be the mass that we want as well. So mass. And then let's add on the mass to that string. Close it out. Okay. Okay, now that we have the string that we want, let's just console log that and see if it looks good. Console log HTML real quick. Go back to our console there. Oops, forgot to pull those out. So let's yank these out because we're not going to use these. Refresh. Nothing's there. Oh no, mass is unknown. I guess we don't always have mass. Let's let me click one more. Maybe this one will have a mass. Oh, this time we have a mass of 20. Well, yeah, it just means in the actual API, he didn't know what the mass was for that character. That's all. Yeah. So everything's working the way we expected. We've got this HTML string. And then the other thing we want to know is how do we append that string to what we have, to the div that we have, right? We want to append so let's try that. So we have our div ID of data, and we can call that out using this. And then we're going to append and pass it in this string that we've just created. All right. Oops. There it is. So each time we click the button, it's going to add more and more to that. Come on, Java. Java. Oh, there's Sacy Teen again. Unknown mass. We got a bunch of unknown masses here. A lot of unknown masses. So if we want filter by Java, yeah, I guess we.
Calling by name? No.
Mass is greater than 10,000.
Yeah, it'd be kind of cool if they had something like that in this API, right? Where we could say we only want characters that are bigger than a certain mass. But
Is that the only endpoint?
So there are a couple other endpoints. They have starships and planets. Starships and planets. So if we did not want these things to keep appending, we would probably want to clear out whatever HTML was inside of our data div. So what we could do is just save that data div to a variable. So we'll say data div equals this particular div. And then so let's say each time we make the call, we want to set the HTML inside the data div to be blank, right? That way we don't keep appending and appending and appending. We'll nullify it or strip it out of any HTML. Then we'll make our call and then we'll replace with whatever comes back. So inside here, when I click on my button, I'm going to want the data div HTML to be, that takes in a string. Oh, actually, that's going to get the contents. Hang on one second. I don't use jQuery very much, so this is kind of, actually, I don't use it at all. I'm going to be frank here. Set inner HTML in jQuery. So here we're Stack Overflowing. How to replace the inner HTML of a div. Here we go. We just called .html and pass in an empty string. Fantastic. Okay, so here we go. Data div. We're going to do HTML of nothing. And then inside here, we'll just change this since we now have a reference to the variable to data div. There we go. Okay. Okay, so see what happened? We got rid of the HTML that we had before we made the call, and then when the call came back, then we appended it just like we were doing before. So now we can just keep going and going and hopefully eventually get to Jabba the Hutt. But for some reason we never get him though.
Shouldn't take more than 88 likes. Bad luck.
But we keep getting CC10. That person is a lucky number. I'd like to tell you yes,
I mean,
but there still is a fair amount of jQuery in the curriculum. You know what? Would you guys like to see how to do it without jQuery? I mean, are you interested in that? All right. Real quick, let's just do. So there's a new native API. It's not new, but a newer native API that we could use. It's called Fetch, and pretty simple syntax. It uses promises, which I think get touched on briefly in the curriculum, but I'll just show you how we could make that very same call using Fetch. Z, did you have a question?
I was just gonna say, can we print the random number that we generate so we know which one like people are? So we know like CC or whatever number they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just console log the number.
I was just curious, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it did tell me you're trying to see what number these.
So let's do this. Let's try this this native Fetch API, and the way that it works is it takes in the URL of the address that we're trying to get. So if we go fetch, and we'll take in that same URL, just grab this here. And that's going to return a promise, which will either resolve or reject. So if we get back the data like we're expecting, then we can. It's going to run in our .then callback. So our .then is the callback that we provide for a successful call. All right. If it's not successful, we can write a .catch. So a .catch would be, it would receive the error, and actually I'll write this a little differently. So it will be a function of an error, and we could simply console log that error. That's one way of handling it.
You have to write the dot catch like for the error.
So if you don't write the dot catch, then you essentially won't handle the error. No, it wouldn't necessarily kill your application. It would just be an unhandled error, and you'll see a red error in the console. Yeah. Yeah, and you could call this anything that you want. I could call it error if I wanted to. Yeah, and really the shorthand way of doing this, rather than writing a function that then just console logs that one parameter, I could just pass in console log itself. And that will just console log what the error was. Question back there? You have a question? Both of you have questions? You do?
So you didn't have to do like a tag or a link to fetch. It's just you just start using it like that.
Yeah, it's going to be available in most modern browsers, and you can check on the MDN. Have you guys ever gone to MDN? You have? So if we check Fetch API on MDN, you can see where it's available. And actually, it's not available on Internet Explorer. So that's the bad news. The good news is it's available on everything else. Who uses Internet Explorer, right? Yeah. Yeah, but it is available on Edge, at least partially. Partially here. So so again, if we're in .fetch, it's going to come back with some kind of response. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call response.json, which will actually turn it will extract the JSON from the response and give that back to me in the next chained promise. So in my next .then method, I can finally use the JSON that came back. Any questions about this? Oh, you know what? This is I wrote this as a fat arrow function. I might change that if this is. Have any of you guys seen fat arrow functions yet? No. No. Same thing. Sorry, no, it's the same thing. Yeah, it just allows us to. It's a succinct way of writing a one-liner like that. You can also do. There's another syntax too. So if we have another function that is going to be more than one line, you would just surround it with curly braces like you do normally. How do you type the fat arrow? Oh, it's the equal sign and the forward caret or the right caret. Yeah, in the oh, I see what you're asking. So I'm using a special font in here. It's called Fira code, and you can enable ligatures in it so that it turns those two characters into the one arrow. So yeah, but if I didn't have ligatures on, it would just look like an equal sign and then the right caret there. So what we're going to do here is, again, and I'll write this as a regular function too, just in case that makes more sense. So we get this response, and then what we're going to do is we're going to return the response .json method, which will give us back the JSON content. And then when we chain the next dot then, this next dot then is taking the output of what this is giving right here. So now we'll actually have the JSON content just like we did inside the jQuery version. Yes.
What's JSON?
JavaScript object notation. So JSON is largely a standard at this point, and it used to be that APIs were returning data in XML, but nowadays most of them are using JSON, and that's what you guys are going to be using throughout this whole stack too. So you'll get pretty comfortable with it. Okay, so we returned the JSON, and then the next thing that we have, we could say a function of that JSON, and then let's do all the same things that we were doing with our Ajax implementation. So inside here, in fact, what I'll do is I'll just grab this whole function. So our success function, I'll just plug that right into here. And then comment out the Ajax, because we're not using that right now. And let's see how we do here. Uh-oh. Why did we get page equals 2? Did I accidentally stick page in there or something? Oh, wait. So we got to fetch and then pass in the number. Yeah. Okay. Bib Fortuna. All right. So this is doing the exact same thing, but with vanilla JavaScript. So I mean, technically we could have done the whole thing with no jQuery at all, but obviously we did use it slightly in here with the dot append. Yeah, but again, it wasn't crucial. We could have done it without. Do you guys have any questions about the first way or the second way or any of the API stuff that we did? Yes.
There's a preference to prefer us using the traditional jQuery or UI licenses.
I don't know. I like Fetch a lot, but I'd say just follow along with the platform. If the platform has you doing it with jQuery, that's fine.
You just feel like that's just better than jQuery.
It's not really an either or thing because jQuery gives you a ton of other functionality in addition to Ajax requests. So I tend to prefer vanilla stuff wherever possible, but that's kind of like a personal preference. It used to be that browsers didn't have support for a lot of things, and that's why jQuery kind of came to the rescue. It would fill in the gaps for you so that if you were trying to do something and you wanted it to be consistent across browsers, you'd use jQuery and that would do it for you.
Nice case when we're deciding between Mean and Burns, all these frameworks that are available to us. Do we just switch up mostly because one framework provides something that the other does not, or is it all based on preference?
It could be either or, yeah. If you found that there was, I think a lot of it is preference, but there are certain things that some frameworks tend to have strengths in and maybe weaknesses in others. Like with Angular, it tends to be very opinionated. Okay, so in Angular, you guys are going to be doing things a very specific way. If you were using React, it's a bit more flexible and allows you to kind of do it the way that you want to do it. So that could obviously be a plus or a minus depending on how flexible you want it to get. you know, it could be difficult for a new developer coming onto a project if you were doing things your own way, and they were like, well, you know, we're used to seeing things a certain way. If you're in Angular, most of the things are going to be a certain way because it's opinionated. So that's kind of the deal with that. Anyway, before we go, I was just going to touch on real quick what the shoot. I think you guys are supposed to be up through like some part of trivia, the trivia assignment today. By the end of the day, that was the end of the day goal, and there's some parts of it are required. So the end of the day goal is that you do the required parts of the trivia assignment, not the optional. All right.
We have a couple of topics scheduled.
Yeah, and I'll find a way to convey that to you.
You can post on Mattermost. That's what.
Yeah, I know. I need to sign up for that. Okay. Yeah, we can do it on Mattermost. That's cool.
Did you also post the activity?
Yeah. Yeah, let me stop the recording.
Yeah.